beneath the emerald canopy of the Amazon, where morning light spills like liquid gold through towers of ancient trees, the world seems timeless. Mist drifts above the forest floor, and the guttural call of howler monkeys trembles through the humid air, as though echoing from a forgotten epoch. Here, in this cathedral of green, life thrives in countless forms, jaguars padding unseen, insects humming like hidden machinery, tribes moving quietly along riverbanks. To stand within this place is to glimpse a world that feels both eternal and unfinished, caught between past and present, and yet a question lingers like smoke between the branches. If humankind arose from apes, why do apes still walk the forests as they are? Why do we not see them slowly shaping into us, into tribes hidden in the jungle, into echoes of our own reflection? Is evolution a ladder to be climbed, rung by rung, until every creature reaches its human destiny? Or is it something far stranger, a restless and indifferent current that carves countless channels, some widening into rivers, others vanishing into the earth? For centuries, myths of progress painted humanity as the summit of creation, with every species below us striving upward. But the forest whispers another truth. It tells of branching paths, of experiments without intention, of survival shaped not by direction but by chance. The ape is not unfinished. The tribes of the Amazon are not echoes of an earlier human. Each is complete, bound not to some imagined hierarchy but to the demands of their world. This is where the journey begins, with a haunting misconception that reveals not only how we see apes, but how we see ourselves. Evolution is not a story of ascent, but of divergence, and the mystery is why one branch became us, while the others remained, in the age when the Amazon was first charted by European explorers. The forest was described as an endless ocean of green, a realm where sunlight dissolved into layers of leaves, and where every branch seemed alive. Among its inhabitants, the primates drew particular fascination. Jesuit missionaries and naturalists of the 17th and 18th centuries wrote of monkeys with hands that seemed almost human, of faces that mirrored expressions familiar and unsettling. To those who had been raised on biblical certainties, these creatures appeared as distorted reflections, uncanny imitations of man almost kin, yet forever other, before science gave shape to the modern theory of evolution. The prevailing vision of nature was not of a branching tree, but of a ladder, this great chain of being placed minerals at the base, plants above them, then animals, and, at its summit, humankind. Every rung was thought to be an ascent, a step toward perfection. In this vision, the monkey was not seen as complete, but as a creature halfway between beast and man, an unfinished draft of the human form. The tribes encountered in the Amazon, living close to the rhythms of the forest, were miscast in this same metaphor, imagined by outsiders as living at a lower rung of the chain, closer to nature and, by false extension, closer to animals themselves. The 19th century shattered this ancient hierarchy. Charles Darwin embarked aboard the Beagle, tracing coastlines and gathering samples with the patience of a meticulous observer. In the variation of finches across the Galapagos, in the subtle differences between creatures separated by oceans, he glimpsed a deeper pattern. Life was not climbing a ladder towards some preordained human destiny. Instead, it was diverging, branching endlessly, experimenting through time. When Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the revelation struck like thunder. Humanity did not descend from monkeys as once imagined. Rather, humans and apes were cousins. their lineages splitting from a common ancestor millions of years before. The idea was both liberating and terrifying. To be akin to animals meant that man was not set apart, not the pinnacle of a sacred hierarchy, but a participant in the same blind process that shaped every creature. Victorian society recoiled. Satirical prints portrayed Darwin as an ape in a suit, a grotesque symbol of the fear that humanity might be reduced in dignity to the level of animals. Yet the science was clear, and the fossils that emerged in subsequent decades only deepened the truth. Humans were but one branch among many, their uniqueness not ordained but carved by circumstance. Still, the old metaphors lingered. Explorers and scientists who gazed upon Amazon tribes continued to misuse them as symbols of earlier stages of humanity, reinforcing a narrative of progress that placed Europe at the top and all others on lower rungs. This distortion revealed less about evolution than it did about the human need to see history as a march toward itself. The forest had no such illusions. Within its canopy, apes thrived not as unfinished humans, but as creatures complete, their forms honed by millions of years of survival in the trees. Evolution was not a path toward us, but a branching of possibilities, of which we are only one. The story of this realization did not unfold in an instant. It was layered, contested, resisted at nearly every turn. For centuries before Darwin, the Amazon and other distant lands were woven into a fabric of myth rather than science. Reports of strange animals were filtered through the expectations of European readers who believed that every creature must fit within the order of a divine plan. The monkey that looked like a man was interpreted as a curiosity, a mistake of creation, or even a warning. Naturalists catalogued these species with wonder, but they did so within a worldview that could not yet conceive of them as relatives. The great chain of being was more than a metaphor. It shaped how people thought about themselves, about the world, and about the hierarchy of existence. Plants were useful but passive, animals were animated but lesser, and humans alone were granted reason and soul. Beyond man, angels and divinity presided. To imagine the ape as something that did not simply occupy a fixed rung but might share a common history with us was to collapse the entire structure. It was to admit that the ladder itself was an illusion. When Darwin wrote of common descent, he proposed something at once elegant and unsettling, that life could be mapped not as a straight ascent but as a tree, each species a branch diverging from shared roots. This was not entirely his invention. Alfred Russel Wallace, who had walked the steaming forests of the Amazon and the Malay archipelago, had glimpsed the same truth. In the diversity of butterflies, in the subtle differences of birds across rivers and mountains, he too perceived a process that selected, preserved, and discarded. Yet even Wallace hesitated when the implications touched humanity. To him, the human mind seemed to grate a leap, to sudden a flame. For Darwin, there was no exception. Mind and body alike were products of the same natural law. The resistance was profound. In Victorian drawing rooms, the suggestion that noble families shared ancestry with apes was treated with laughter, disgust, even outrage, for a society deeply invested in the certainty of progress. The notion that humans were not the end point of creation, but merely another branch, was a direct affront. The debate was not merely scientific, it was existential. If man was not a part, then the boundaries that justified empires, hierarchies, and dominion over nature trembled. The Amazon, in this cultural theatre, became more than a forest. It was projected as a living museum, a place where outsiders believed they could glimpse humanity's past. Tribes who had lived for millennia with sophisticated languages, spiritual systems, and ecological knowledge were reduced in colonial imagination to earlier humans. This distortion was powerful because it mirrored the old chain of being. Some groups were cast as closer to the animal, others as more advanced, yet the reality was different. The people of the Amazon were no more relics than the apes in the canopy. Both were products of the present, adapted in body and culture to environments that demanded resilience and ingenuity. Science, too, bore the scars of these misconceptions. Early anthropology often sought to classify human groups into stages of evolution, echoing the discredited ladder. Chronometry, phrenology, and other pseudosciences attempted to measure progress by skull size and shape, reinforcing prejudices under the guise of biology. In these distortions, apes and indigenous peoples alike were entangled in false hierarchies that claimed to show the trajectory of evolution as a march toward a singular, European-defined ideal, but the fossils told a different story. The discovery of Neanderthal remains in the mid-19th century revealed that other human species had once walked the earth, species neither primitive nor unfinished, but parallel experiments in the shaping of intelligence and form. Later finds, such as Australopithecus afarensis, showed small, upright beings who lived millions of years ago, long before modern humans, yet who were not apes becoming men, nor men becoming gods, but something in between. The tree of life grew denser with every discovery, its branches twisting, overlapping, and often breaking into extinction. The apes of the Amazon remained what they had always been, survivors in a demanding world. Their hands grasped branches with precision, their social bonds mirrored in grooming and calls, their intelligence expressed not in language but in the silent strategies of survival. To say they should evolve into humans was to misunderstand evolution itself. Evolution has no should. It has no upward drive, no hidden script that demands all creatures converge upon a single form. The chimpanzee is no less complete than the human. Both are the outcomes of lineages tested by time, honed by selection, and sculpted by chance. And yet, the metaphor of the ladder persists, even now. In everyday conversation, people still speak of being more evolved, as if time itself were a measure of superiority. But age does not equal advancement. The cockroach has remained largely unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, not because it is primitive, but because it is successful. The shark glides through oceans with a body design older than trees, not because it is incomplete, but because it is efficient. The ape thrives in the forest canopy for the same reason. Change comes not to fulfill destiny, but to survive pressure. Where survival is assured, stability can last for ages. In this light, the Amazon tribes are not echoes of an earlier stage of humanity, but testaments to another form of evolution, cultural. Unlike genes, culture can shift in decades, adapting language, technology, and knowledge to new circumstances. The people of the rainforest have developed complex systems of navigation, medicine derived from plants, and cosmologies tied to the rhythms of the land. Their evolution is no less real than biological evolution, but it operates in another dimension, rapid, fluid, untethered from the slowness of genetic change. The deeper truth revealed by Darwin and those who followed was that all life shares ancestry. The ape does not become human because it already is the culmination of its own path. The tribes of the Amazon are not windows into the past, but contemporaries shaped by unique histories. And humans themselves are not the summit of evolution, but a branch among many, remarkable, yes, but not inevitable. This realization marks the true origin of discovery. The shift from seeing nature as a ladder of progress to seeing it as a branching tree, a fractal of divergence where every form is both ancient and new. It is a vision that humbles as much as it enlightens, for it suggests that the world is not marching toward us, nor beyond us. It is expanding in all directions at once, a living testament to chance, to adaptation, and to the endless creativity of time. The first waves of reaction to Darwin's idea spread not like calm reason, but like shock through Victorian society. The publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859 was a scientific tremor that became a cultural earthquake. Alfred Russel Wallace, Darwin's contemporary and, in some ways, rival, had arrived at similar conclusions from his time in the rainforests of the Amazon and the islands of the Malay archipelago. He too had traced the subtle threads of variation in creatures separated by mere rivers or mountain ridges. Yet while Darwin was unwavering in applying natural selection to both body and mind, Wallace hesitated. For him, the human intellect, language, art, consciousness itself seemed to demand something more than blind selection, something spiritual or immaterial. Their debate stretched into letters, journals, and lectures, echoing the broader conflict between natural explanations and the need to preserve humanity's sense of exceptionalism. For the public, the implications were stark and unsettling. If man and ape shared a common ancestor, then the gulf that scripture and tradition had drawn between them narrowed to a fragile thread. Caricaturists seized the image. Newspapers depicted Darwin himself as an ape with spectacles, a grotesque parody that distilled the unease of a society terrified of being pulled downward rather than raised upward. The fear was not only of origins, but of destiny. If evolution could transform beasts into men, might it also drag men back into beasts? Man descending into monkey became a satirical nightmare, a reversal of the myth of progress that haunted the Victorian imagination. Science itself was not immune to these anxieties. Early anthropologists, eager to impose order upon the bewildering diversity of human cultures, began to map humanity into stages of supposed progress. Tribes encountered in Africa, the Pacific, and the Amazon were placed at lower rungs of an imagined ladder, with industrial Europe at its pinnacle. The Amazonian peoples, whose knowledge of botany, river systems, and ecological cycles was profound, were misrepresented as living fossils, as if they were echoes of an earlier human stage rather than contemporaries. This distortion revealed less about biology than about the colonial mind, which projected hierarchy onto both culture and evolution. The great chain of being had collapsed under Darwin's tree of life, yet its ghosts lingered. The ladder metaphor proved too seductive to abandon, and it infiltrated early scientific discourse. Skulls were measured, noses classified, and bodies catalogued in the name of tracing humanity's climb from primitive to civilized. The result blurred culture with biology, treating social difference as evolutionary destiny. Evolution, stripped of Darwin's subtlety, was recast as a justification for empire and superiority, a pseudo-scientific scaffolding for prejudice. Yet beneath this misinterpretation, a deeper truth was beginning to take hold. Fossil discoveries and comparative anatomy revealed that evolution was not a linear ascent, but a branching of forms, many of which vanished into extinction. Neanderthals were not failed humans, but a parallel species. Australopithecus was not a primitive ape becoming human, but a distinct being adapted to its time. The idea that tribes represented earlier versions of humanity crumbled under the weight of evidence. Every human alive was equally modern, equally the product of millions of years of evolution. The apes, too, were not behind, but simply different, their own paths of survival, etched by forest canopies and ecological niches that required no march toward humanity. Still, the metaphor of progress clung to imagination. It offered a sense of destiny, of purpose, of upward motion in a world that felt otherwise indifferent. To see the universe as a ladder was to preserve meaning. To see it as a tree was to confront chaos. This tension between the comfort of progress and the reality of divergence shaped not only the first reactions to Darwin, but the way evolution would be misunderstood for generations. The tension between revelation and resistance did not remain confined to the pages of journals or private correspondence. It erupted into public spectacle. In 1860, at Oxford, the British Association for the Advancement of Science convened a debate that would become legendary. On one side stood Bishop Samuel Wilberforce, a master of rhetoric and defender of the established order. On the other, Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's fierce ally and soon to be known as Darwin's bulldog, Wilberforce, with polished wit, mocked the idea that humans might be kin to apes, asking whether it was through his grandmother or grandfather that Huxley claimed descent from a monkey. Huxley's reply, sharp and unflinching, cut through the laughter. He would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who used his intellect to obscure truth. The debate was not merely about science, but about identity, dignity, and the place of humankind in the cosmos. While such public clashes drew headlines, subtler battles played out in laboratories and museums. Naturalists, armed with calipers and measuring tapes, sought to arrange skulls into sequences, believing they could trace a straight path from primitive forms to modern humans. Collections of bones and artifacts brought back from colonial expeditions were displayed as evidence of humanity's supposed hierarchy. In this way, scientific ambition became entangled with imperial ideology. The Amazon, Africa, and Oceania were transformed into imagined time machines, their living peoples reduced to symbols of an evolutionary past rather than recognized as fully present, fully human. These misinterpretations seeped into the cultural imagination. Illustrated magazines portrayed savages alongside gorillas, suggesting a continuum that placed Europeans at the apex of progress. Writers invoked the metaphor of missing links, conjuring an invisible bridge between ape and man. The phrase carried a dual weight. It implied both the hope of discovery and the dread that humanity's uniqueness might vanish under the cold logic of natural law. What was overlooked in this hunger for continuity was Darwin's central insight, that evolution does not march in a line but spreads like a branching river, each channel carving its own path through the terrain of time. Charles Darwin himself remained cautious, almost reluctant, when extending his theory directly to humans. On the Origin of Species, he wrote little on the subject, leaving only the cryptic remark that light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. It was in The Descent of Man, published in 1871, that he fully embraced the implications. Humans were not separate from nature but a part of it, shaped by the same forces that molded finches and barnacles. He argued that moral sense, language, and even beauty could be explained by natural selection and sexual selection, rather than by divine exception. This claim was as shocking as it was profound. If human faculties were products of nature, then the boundary between culture and biology blurred in unsettling ways. Yet, Darwin's own nuance was often lost in translation. Popular discourse simplified his ideas into a crude ladder of progress. The notion of lower and higher races emerged, supported not by rigorous evidence, but by a cultural desire to rank and classify. Indigenous tribes, including those in the Amazon, were cast as representatives of an earlier stage of evolution, as though they were windows into humanity's own childhood. This assumption ignored the reality that these societies had developed complex knowledge systems, adapted intricately to their environments, and evolved culturally in ways as sophisticated as any industrial nation. The error lay not in science itself, but in its misuse, the bending of theory to reinforce prejudice. Wallace, whose observations of the Amazon's teeming life had first shaped his evolutionary insights, became increasingly uneasy with the way Darwinian thought was being weaponized. While he disagreed with Darwin on the purely material origin of the human mind, he remained deeply critical of attempts to rank peoples on a scale of progress. In his later writings, he emphasized cooperation, mutual aid, and the profound intelligence embedded in all human societies. In this sense, Wallace offered a corrective that was ignored by much of the mainstream, that evolution was not simply a battle of survival, but a story of adaptation, diversity, and resilience. As the century progressed, fossil discoveries in Europe began to dismantle the myth of linear ascent. The unearthing of Neanderthal remains in Germany revealed a parallel lineage, not a primitive ancestor, but a cousin species, capable of tool-making and perhaps even symbolic thought. Each discovery complicated the ladder, bending it into a network of branches. Still, the cultural inertia of progress was difficult to escape. The ladder reassured. It implied destiny, order, inevitability. The tree unsettled. It implied contingency, chance, and the haunting possibility of extinction. The Amazon itself remained a symbol in this evolving debate. For European explorers, it was a canvas upon which they projected their visions of humanity's past. Accounts described tribes as if they were snapshots of prehistory, existing outside the flow of modernity. Yet anthropological research, even in its early form, began to reveal the flaw in this narrative. The knowledge systems of Amazonian peoples, their mastery of medicinal plants, their sustainable cultivation of forest gardens, their oral histories, mapping landscapes with precision, spoke not of stagnation but of adaptation, as advanced as any technological society. They were not relics of an earlier humanity, but contemporaries, walking a different path along the same evolutionary horizon. The first scientific reactions to Darwin and Wallace thus tell a dual story. On one hand, they reveal the profound difficulty of letting go of inherited metaphors, the chain, the ladder, the idea of upward progress. On the other, they illuminate the resilience of truth, that life is not ordered by rank but by diversity, not striving for a single summit but radiating outward into countless forms. This recognition would take decades to crystallize, and even today, echoes of the old misinterpretations linger in public imagination. The Victorian debates were more than intellectual exercises. They were moments of reckoning, in the tension between caricature and discovery, between prejudice and evidence. The outlines of a new worldview were slowly emerging, a worldview in which humanity was no longer the endpoint of creation, but a branch among many on a tree vast enough to contain both ape and man, Amazon tribe and European city, each equally modern, each equally shaped by the ceaseless currents of evolution. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Europe's first great natural history museums, the silence of stone was beginning to whisper. Fossilized fragments, unearthed from caves and riverbeds, spoke of lives lived millions of years before the first cities, before writing, before memory itself. In the late 19th century, the discovery of Neanderthal bones in Germany shook the foundations of belief. These were not brutish caricatures, as newspapers depicted them, but beings who walked upright, who fashioned tools, who bore the mark of intelligence. Soon, from Africa came the remains of Australopithecus, a small, upright ape, neither fully human nor entirely other, a messenger from deep time. And then, in Asia, the bones of Homo erectus, tall and resilient, who carried fire across continents. Each new find shattered the illusion of a single, unbroken line of ascent. Humanity was no longer a solitary climber toward perfection, but one branch among many, part of a tangled grove of species, each with its own fate. The story these fossils revealed was stranger and more unsettling than the ladder of progress ever suggested. There was no smooth march upward, no predetermined summit. Instead, there were extinctions and divergences, experiments in flesh and bone. Some species thrived for hundreds of thousands of years only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only fragments for us to puzzle over. Others adapted, survived, and passed their legacy forward. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other forgotten cousins walked beside Homo sapiens, not behind them. For long ages, the earth was shared, multiple forms of humanity coexisting, each adapted to its own corner of the world. Meanwhile, the apes remained. They were not echoes of the past, nor ancestors frozen in time, but contemporaries on their own evolutionary journeys. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans followed their own branching paths, perfectly fitted to forests, savannas, and jungles. To imagine them as stalled, as if waiting to become human, was to misunderstand the very fabric of evolution. They were not behind us, but beside us, alive in their own present. Their story was not unfinished. It was complete in its own right. In the 20th century, the boundary between ape and human grew still more complex. Field studies, pioneered by Jane Goodall, Dion Fossey, and Beirut Galdikas, revealed the richness of ape societies. Chimpanzees fashioned tools, stripped branches to fish for termites, cracked nuts with stones, and passed techniques through generations. They hunted in coordinated groups, shared food, and displayed politics woven from alliances and rivalries. Gorillas lived in cohesive family bands, bound by the quiet authority of silverback. Orangutans, solitary and contemplative, demonstrated remarkable memory and intelligence. Here was culture, not human culture, but animal culture, fluid, flexible, alive. And yet, despite its sophistication, it followed its own trajectory. Intelligence had not set them on a conveyor belt toward humanity. It had instead anchored them more deeply in their own way of being. Far across the oceans, in the green labyrinth of the Amazon, another kind of revelation unfolded. Anthropologists walked beneath the towering canopy, among rivers that reflected the stars, and encountered peoples whose lives were interwoven with the forest. These tribes carried knowledge as ancient as fire, how to brew poisons that tipped arrows, how to cure fevers with leaves, how to navigate the river's shifting moods. Their societies spoke languages unwritten, carried mythologies as vast as the night sky, and built homes and rituals adapted with exquisite precision to their surroundings. To outside eyes, these cultures were sometimes miscast as primitive, but science revealed the truth. Culture evolves at a speed biology cannot match. In the span of a few generations, entire lifeways could transform, while genes moved at their own slow pace across millennia. This juxtaposition was profound. Fossils told of bodies evolving slowly, branching, diverging. Living apes demonstrated that intelligence alone did not predestine a march toward humanity, and the Amazon tribes showed that the force of cultural evolution could leap forward faster than any mutation, creating knowledge systems capable of rivaling the most sophisticated cities. The lesson became inescapable. Evolution was not destiny. It was not a road with a finish line, but a shifting dance between bodies and environments, between chance and necessity. The early investigations into humanity's origins, into apes and their kin, into tribes and their ways of life, revealed a world far richer than the myths of progress allowed. It was not a story of ascent, but of adaptation, not of ladders, but of trees. In the deep time of Earth, nothing was frozen, nothing was waiting to become something else. All were already complete, already alive within their own unfolding present. The deeper the search pressed into the earth, the more the bones revealed a truth both humbling and immense. In 1924, the discovery of the Tong child in South Africa, a small skull belonging to Australopithecus africanus, startled the scientific world. It was the face of a child, yet unlike any human child known, with its blend of ape-like features and upright posture. Here was evidence that the cradle of humanity lay not in Europe, as many had once assumed, but in Africa. Later, the unearthing of Australopithecus afarensis with the famous specimen Lucy walked us further back in time. Lucy, standing only 3.5 feet tall, bore hips and knees that testified to habitual bipedalism. She was not on her way to becoming human. She was already perfectly adapted to her Miocene and Pliocene world, straddling trees and open savanna with a body made for both. The record continued to expand. Homo habilis, with its association to simple stone tools, suggested an early spark of ingenuity. Homo erectus emerged as a wanderer, tall and resilient, spreading from Africa into Asia, carrying fire, crafting more refined implements, and persisting for nearly 2 million years, far longer than our own species has yet existed. Neanderthals arose in Europe, stocky and powerful, their skulls broad, their capacities astonishing. They buried their dead, used pigments, and likely spoke in languages lost to time. And then, in the caves of Siberia, a single finger bone gave rise to a revelation. The Denisovans, a lineage once hidden entirely, now known through the delicate traces of DNA. These were not steps on a ladder to us, but branches, many branches, most of which ended in extinction. Humanity was never a single line. It was a forest of possibilities. In that forest of ancestry, apes remain not as shadows, but as survivors of their own stories. The chimpanzee is no more a primitive human than the eagle is a primitive airplane. Each follows its own thread, its own destiny within evolution's tapestry. The gorilla's massive frame is tuned to the abundance of leafy diets. The orangutan's long arms and solitary nature are sculpted by the vast forests of Borneo and Sumatra. To imagine them as incomplete is to miss the miracle of their survival. They are not waiting to become us, because they are already complete within their own ecological symphony. The contrast between fossil humanity and living apes deepened as scientists looked closer at behavior. In the 1960s, Jane Goodall's long watch over the Gombe chimpanzees revealed startling continuities. She observed mothers tenderly cradling their infants, juveniles playing, groups setting ambushes for colobus monkeys. She saw them strip branches to dip into termite mounds, shaping tools to harvest hidden meals. Culture was not the monopoly of humankind. It had roots deep in our shared ancestry, but the divergence was equally clear. Chimpanzee culture did not spiral outward into the accelerating feedback loops that shaped human societies. Fire did not spread from hearth to city. Myths did not grow into religions. tools did not compound into technologies. Their culture was steady, adaptive, but not exponential at the same time. Anthropologists in the Amazon were learning a lesson of another kind. They saw that culture itself could shift in ways far swifter than biology. Within a generation, entire hunting strategies, rituals, or agricultural techniques could evolve. Knowledge was transmitted not in DNA but in stories, songs, and practices. These changes unfolded at a pace millions of times faster than genetic mutation. A tribe might adopt new crops, alter its language, or transform its myths within the span of a single human life. The realization struck hard. Humanity's most powerful evolutionary leap was not a biological mutation, but the invention of cumulative culture, the ability to store knowledge beyond the body, to share it, and to build upon it. This recognition reframed the puzzle. If apes shared intelligence and even culture, why did their trajectories not mirror our own? The answer was not that they were behind, but that their environments demanded no such leap. Chimpanzees thrive in equatorial forests where survival requires agility, memory, and cooperation, but not the invention of writing. Orangutans live where fruiting trees demand careful foraging, not fire or metallurgy. They are exquisitely fitted to their worlds. Humanity, by chance and pressure, was driven into new ecological spaces, arid grasslands, shifting climates, unstable resources. Those crucibles forced innovation, language, cooperation on scales never before required. The branching diverged not because one was superior, but because environments carved different paths. Even the tribes of the Amazon remind us of this truth. To outsiders, they were once seen as remnants of an earlier age. In truth, they are as modern as any city dweller, the inheritors of the same evolutionary timeline. Their ways of life are not frozen echoes of prehistory, but the result of cultural adaptation to one of the planet's most demanding environments. To navigate a rainforest's complexity, its poisons, medicines, animals, and spirits, requires knowledge of a scale equal to that of satellites or skyscrapers. The difference is not one of progress, but of adaptation. The fossils, the apes, the tribes, all converge upon the same lesson. Evolution is not a staircase with steps to be climbed, but a river delta, branching and diverging, sometimes flowing into wide channels, sometimes disappearing into sand. Each branch carries its own completeness, its own validity. Some endure, others vanish, but none are unfinished. The early investigations into our past left us with a vision at once unsettling and liberating. Humanity is not the inevitable outcome of evolution. We are but one branch among many, a survivor of contingencies, a bearer of chance. The apes in the forests, the fossils in the rocks, the tribes in the Amazon all testify to the same reality. Life is not moving toward a single summit, but sprawling outward, endlessly, into possibility. The century turned, and with it, the very language of life was unveiled. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick, building upon the meticulous X-ray diffraction images captured by Rosalind Franklin, revealed the double helix of DNA. It was as if the book of nature, once glimpsed only through fossils and bones, had been opened at last. Within that spiraling staircase of nucleotides lay the code not only for the human being, but for every leaf, every insect, every ape that still wandered the forests of the world. Suddenly, the kinship Darwin had intuited through observation could be measured, written in the very alphabet of life itself. When the strands of human DNA were compared with those of our closest relatives, The results stunned even those prepared for similarity. Chimpanzees and humans share roughly 98 to 99% of their genetic script. Out of 3 billion letters, only a small fraction separates the ape from the astronaut, the forest forager from the builder of cities. The gulf that seemed so vast in culture and consciousness was, at the molecular level, astonishingly narrow. And yet, in that narrowness lay a mystery greater than any fossil could reveal. How could such a slender difference give rise to language, art, science, myth, the architecture of civilization itself? The answer lies not in the sheer quantity of genes, but in their regulation, in the subtleties of timing, activation, and interaction. A small shift in when a gene awakens, or how long it burns, can ripple across the architecture of a brain, the proportions of a body, the balance of hormones. Mutations accumulate, some erased by the indifference of natural selection, others carried forward by chance. Evolution is not a conscious sculptor, but a blind process of trial and error, a storm of change that sometimes assembles wings, sometimes reshapes hands into instruments of tool-making. Drift, mutation, and selection do not march toward a goal. They carve, erode, and redirect. Like a river meandering across an ancient plain, in the Amazon rainforest, this principle can be witnessed in exquisite detail. Within its endless green labyrinth, life fragments and diversifies, not into a single chain of progress, but into a mosaic of niches. One tree species may split into dozens, each adapted to soil, altitude, or insect partner. Birds diverge by beak and song, butterflies by wing and camouflage. None evolve toward an imagined pinnacle, none march toward humanity. Each becomes what the forest demands, shaped by predator and prey, by fruiting cycles and hidden rivers. Evolution here is not a ladder, but an explosion of forms, each a testament to survival in its own place. The same truth humbles the human question. Tribes of the Amazon, encountered by anthropologists across the last century, are not apes partway along a road to humanity. They are fully human, their DNA indistinguishable in its essence from any city dweller across the globe. Their languages, often complex in grammar and sound, carry centuries of accumulated wisdom. Their technologies, woven from forest materials, are tuned with precision to their environment. They are not relics of a primitive past, but the living outcome of cultural evolution, a process that runs parallel to but much faster than genetic change. Where DNA takes millennia to shift, culture transforms in the span of lifetimes. The breakthrough observations of genetics made the distinction undeniable. Apes are not evolving into humans because they are evolving as themselves, their genes responding to pressures that differ from our own. The 98% shared code does not reveal incompleteness. It reveals kinship, a shared origin branching into divergent fates. What separates the species is not destiny, but divergence. And yet, within that narrow 1% of difference lies the story of humanity's singular trajectory, a story of neural circuits rewired, of symbolic thought ignited, of language flowering into abstraction. That 1% is the chasm between termite fishing sticks and telescopes peering into the birth of galaxies. It is the space in which myth was born, where the first fires were kindled, where memory became history. Still, genetics reminds us of the deeper truth. This separation is not infinite. It is delicate, recent, and fragile. The apes remain our cousins, not our shadows. Their DNA tells us that we share a common ancestor no more than 7 million years in the past, a blink of time against the 4 billion year history of life. And so the question lingers, not as a challenge to science, but as a mirror to our own imagination. Why do we so often insist on seeing a ladder when the forest of life around us shows only branches? The double helix had revealed its form, but it was only the beginning of revelation. As the 20th century advanced, scientists turned to the fine print of the code, uncovering not only its letters, but its punctuation, its rhythms, the orchestration by which genes awaken and fall silent. What mattered was not only what was written, but how it was read. A single genetic sequence could be interpreted in different ways across tissues, its meaning altered by context. Out of this complexity rose the realization that even small changes could bend the trajectory of a species. Among the most studied of these is FOXP2, often called the language gene. In humans, subtle mutations in this regulatory sequence are associated with the ability to form complex speech, to bind sounds into words, and words into sentences. Chimpanzees carry their own version of FOXP2, nearly identical, yet lacking the critical refinements that enable the flowering of syntax. Here, in the difference of a few nucleotides, lies the gulf between gestures in the forest and the poetry of civilizations. The lesson was profound. Evolution does not require sweeping rewrites, but minor edits with far-reaching consequences. The same principle appears in brain development. Humans and chimpanzees both grow neural networks of staggering complexity, but the timing of growth differs. A small delay in the closing of a developmental window allows human neurons more time to connect, weaving additional circuits that support abstract thought, symbolic reasoning, and long-term planning. Evolution did not build a new brain from scratch. It stretched an old pattern, lengthened a period of growth, and in doing so, opened space for imagination. These shifts are not steps on a ladder, but branches from a common trunk. Each lineage finds its balance. The ape with its strength and memory of forests, the human with its visions of past and future. Genetics also revealed the role of randomness, mutation, and drift as invisible sculptors. Not every change was guided by advantage. Many were carried forward simply by chance. In small populations, a gene might spread not because it was superior, but because it happened to persist. The path of life, traced at the molecular scale, was as much about accident as adaptation. This truth unraveled the myth of inevitable progress. If humanity's gifts arose from chance mutations, then there was no certainty that intelligence was the destiny of life. It might be rare, fragile, even fleeting in the wider cosmos. In the Amazon rainforest, the same patterns unfolded in the diversity of species that fill its canopy. Genetic studies show that one river can divide populations of birds or insects, isolating them just enough that over thousands of years, mutations accumulate and new species emerge. Some adapt to high branches, others to the shadowed understory. Orchids evolve to match the tongue of a single pollinating moth. Fish diverge between tributaries, each tuned to slight differences in current depth or sediment. Nowhere is evolution a march toward a single form. Everywhere it is a branching, a multiplication of strategies, a testament to survival in niches. The forest itself becomes a living metaphor for the genetic tree, sprawling, divergent, endlessly experimental. Anthropologists studying Amazonian tribes found an echo of this same principle in culture. Languages splintered and evolved across valleys and rivers, each with unique grammar, sound, and metaphor. Some tribes carried words numbering in the tens of thousands, while others compressed meaning into subtle tones. These changes, unlike the slow pace of DNA, unfolded swiftly. A child born into one generation might grow up speaking a dialect incomprehensible to her grandparents. Culture, too, was evolution, faster, less constrained, more volatile. It showed that not all divergence is biological. Some of the most profound branching occurs in thought, in story, in the symbols a people carry. Thus, the distinction became clear. Apes are not unfinished humans, and tribes are not halfway states between ape and city. Apes carry their own evolutionary trajectory, carved into their genomes by millions of years of forest life. Tribes carry the same DNA as every other human alive, but culture grants them pathways suited to their landscapes. The idea of a universal ladder collapsed under the weight of genetic and cultural evidence. What replaced it was a vision of life as endlessly plural, endlessly branching. And yet, even as these truths crystallized, a haunting reflection remained. If so little separates human and ape in DNA, what then separates them in destiny? The 1% difference seems small, almost negligible, and yet it shaped the course of history, pushing one lineage toward fire and flight, the other toward forests and silence. Perhaps the mystery lies not in the difference itself, but in the feedback loops it created. A slightly larger brain allowed slightly more complex tools, which allowed better survival, which favored still greater intelligence. Over generations, this cycle accelerated, until culture became the true engine of change. The rainforest offers its mirror once again. A single mutation in a flower's shape may attract a new pollinator. That pairing creates new opportunities, new pressures, new colors, new scents. Soon, what was once a single species diversifies into dozens, each locked in intimate partnership with its chosen insect. Small differences cascade into vast divergence. So too with humanity. Tiny shifts in DNA, amplified by culture, cascaded into agriculture, cities, machines, and telescopes that reach for galaxies. The breakthrough of genetics was not only in showing how close we are to apes, but in revealing how small the margins of change must be to redirect an entire destiny. In the spiral of DNA lies both kinship and divergence, chance and necessity. It tells us that evolution is neither progress nor pause, but branching possibility. And it reminds us that the apes in the forest are not echoes of our past, but living answers to a different question. The question refuses to fade. In classrooms, in casual conversations, in whispered wonderings beneath the stars, it surfaces again and again. If humans came from apes, why are apes still here? It is a question rooted not in science, but in the deep entanglement of myth and metaphor. The idea of a ladder, a march, a destiny that moves in one direction only. In that vision, humans stand proudly at the summit, while every other creature lingers below, waiting its turn to climb. But nature does not build ladders. Nature builds trees. The fossil record whispers this truth. Branches diverge, some flourishing, others withering into extinction. For every species that thrives, countless others are lost to time, their experiments in form and function abandoned in the silence of the past. Apes are not remnants of an unfinished journey, nor shadows cast behind humanity. They are parallel branches, honed by millions of years of adaptation to forests, rivers, and savannas. To remain an ape is not failure. It is survival, perfectly tuned to a world that still offers fruit, canopy, and shelter. The illusion of progress blinds with its simplicity. Human technology seems to paint a story of inevitability, from stone to steel, from fire to fusion. Yet biology does not obey the metaphors of civilization. Evolution cares nothing for progress. nothing for intelligence, nothing for grandeur. It favors only persistence. The rainforest itself proves this. In the Amazon, life reaches no summit. Beetles and orchids, parrots and jaguars, vines and fungi, each is complete in its niche. Each is perfected for the pressures it faces. None are waiting to become something else. So it is with apes. A gorilla is not an incomplete human. A chimpanzee is not a primitive ancestor left behind. They are themselves, successful in the very measure that matters. Survival across deep time. Their bodies, their societies, their instincts are answers to environments stable enough to reward what has long worked. Humanity, by contrast, arose in landscapes that shifted like restless seas, climates changing, plains expanding, forests retreating. Pressure forged flexibility, and flexibility birthed culture, language, imagination. One path, not a higher one. And yet, the human mind resists this truth. The desire to be unique, to be chosen, bends perception. To think that apes remain unchanged while humans advanced is comforting, but false. Apes, too, continue to evolve. Subtle genetic shifts shape their resistance to disease, their reproductive strategies, their foraging behaviors. The form seems ancient only because it fits. Where forests remain, apes endure, not as relics, but as contemporaries. The deeper mystery is philosophical. If evolution is not a ladder, if there is no pinnacle, then what is humanity's place? To be differently evolved is not to be more evolved. Intelligence itself may be an adaptation as fragile as a wing, as temporary as an antler span. If the climate shifts beyond human control, if ecosystems unravel, if the balance of resources fails, then no achievement of art or science will shield humanity from the indifference of natural law. In this haunting realization lies the humility of science. Evolution's gaze is cold, unshaken by triumph or tragedy. It has erased giants larger than whales, wings wider than aircraft, predators sharper than any blade. It will erase us too, if the balance tilts beyond repair. To ask why apes have not turned into humans is to misunderstand the story entirely. The truer question is whether humans can endure as long as apes already have. Beneath the canopy of the Amazon, tribes move with the forest, their knowledge echoing patterns of survival older than writing. Among them, myths whisper that animals are kin, not lesser beings. Here, the scientific and the spiritual meet, converging on a single truth, that humanity is not above the tree of life, but within it, one branch among many. The tree grows outward, not upward. It thrives by diversity, not destiny. And so, the mystery deepens, not because the answer is absent, but because it challenges the very structure of human thought. The ape remains an ape. The human remains human. Each the unfolding of possibility shaped by environment, chance, and time. Progress is an illusion cast by perspective. Survival is the only measure evolution keeps. And in that ledger, the story is still being written for us, for the apes, for all the branches that tomorrow may bring. The misconception lingers because the human imagination is restless, always seeking stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. To the mind shaped by centuries of myth, everything must be a journey toward a final form. In that lens, evolution appears as a staircase, each rung leading upward until the summit is reached, and there, humans stand, gazing down upon the unfinished. But in truth, nature has no summit. It has no destination. Its only rhythm is variation, selection, survival, and extinction. playing out endlessly in branching patterns. Consider the fate of Neanderthals. They were not a crude step toward humanity, but a parallel branch, gifted with strength, intelligence, and even art. They buried their dead, painted walls with pigments, and crafted tools with precision. For thousands of years, they lived alongside Homo sapiens, not as half-finished humans, but as a different expression of the same evolutionary possibilities. Their disappearance was not because they failed to climb higher, but because circumstance and chance tilted the balance. Some interbred with us. Their genes flow within modern bloodlines. Others vanished with the cold winds of changing climates and the expansion of rival populations. Evolution did not discard them as incomplete. It erased them as it has erased so many branches. Crocodiles tell the opposite tale. Their lineage stretches back more than 200 million years, through ages when continents were fused, when forests of ferns towered where deserts now lie. They are not primitive reptiles waiting to evolve. They are specialists, sharpened into near perfection for their watery ambush. Time has tested them with meteor strikes, ice ages, and shifting seas. Still they endure. To remain the same is not to stand still, but to survive. The same is true for apes. Their apparent constancy is an illusion created by human arrogance. Beneath the surface, change is continuous. Shifts in immunity, variations in behavior, adaptations to the pressures of the environment. The forest molds them, just as it molds orchids and poison frogs. Their intelligence, though different from ours, is no less a product of evolution's sculpting. Chimpanzees wage wars, form alliances, and teach their young. Orangutans memorize the shifting cycles of fruiting trees across vast landscapes. Gorillas live by social bonds that anchor their survival. Each behavior is not a pause but a progression, tuned not toward humanity, but toward the stability of the world they inhabit. The Amazon itself is a mirror of this truth. Its rivers carve new paths each season, flooding and receding in a rhythm that dictates survival. Fish that breathe air, ants that farm fungi, birds that weave floating nests, each is a master of its own adaptation. To ask why they do not become something else is to miss their perfection in the present. Apes, too, belong to such perfection. In the cathedral of the rainforest, they need no transformation into another species, for the niche they occupy is already complete. The illusion of human superiority falters further when the lens widens to deep time. For more than 99% of Earth's history, humans did not exist. Dinosaurs ruled for nearly 180 million years, an expanse so vast that human history, by comparison, is the blink of an eye. If longevity is a measure of success, then humanity is only beginning its trial. While apes, crocodiles, and countless unchanged species have already proven their endurance. To be ancient is not to be unfinished. It is to have passed the test of ages. But the most unsettling truth lies ahead, not behind. Evolution's indifference is total. It did not spare mammoths, it did not spare saber-toothed cats, and it will not spare humans if the environment turns against us. Already, climate change reshapes coastlines, forests, and weather patterns. Diseases evolve faster than medicine, microbes adapt with terrifying speed. In this relentless churn, intelligence offers no guarantee of survival. Civilization, with all its brilliance, is still bound to ecosystems it cannot live without. If those systems collapse, humanity may follow as surely as any branch that snapped beneath the weight of time. This realization deepens the mystery. To ask why apes remain apes is to seek a ladder where none exists. The better question is whether, Humanity's own adaptations will endure the next great test. If intelligence proves fragile, if culture cannot outpace catastrophe, then humans may one day vanish as Neanderthals did. In that silence, apes, or whatever follows them, may continue, not as unfinished versions of ourselves, but as survivors in their own right. In the end, the measure of evolution is not progress but persistence. The forest holds no hierarchy, only coexistence. The gorilla is not lesser, the tribe is not unfinished, the human is not supreme. All are branches reaching outward, each leaf catching the light of a moment in time. And as long as the tree grows, no branch can claim to be its crown. At the frontier of biology, a new language is spoken, the language of development itself, known as evolutionary developmental biology, or evo-devo. It peers into the hidden choreography of genes as embryos form, organs unfold, and bodies take shape. Within this discipline lies a profound revelation. Small genetic switches, not sweeping transformations, can sculpt entire anatomies. A single change in a regulatory gene can elongate a limb, alter a face, or shift the wiring of a brain. Evolution, then, is not a lumbering beast of chance alone, but a process sensitive to the subtlest of edits, building vast differences from minute instructions. The discovery of DNA's double helix by Watson and Crick was the key that unlocked the script of life, but it was the subsequent mapping of the human genome that revealed the astonishing closeness between species once thought worlds apart. Humans and chimpanzees, for all their divergence, share nearly 99% of their DNA. That final fraction of difference, scattered across regulatory sequences and timing mechanisms, determines the gulf between language and silence, between firelit cities and forest canopies. evo-devo teaches that such gulfs are not carved by grand leaps, but by quiet retunings of when and how genes express themselves. And now, with CRISPR, humanity has placed its hand upon this switchboard. The gene editing tool, first harnessed from the defenses of bacteria, allows precise cutting and rewriting of genetic code. What once required eons of trial and error could, in theory, be nudged in the span of a laboratory experiment. In these sterile rooms, a question emerges that chills as much as it tempts. If humans can steer their own evolution, could they not also steer the evolution of others? Could an ape be nudged along the path toward greater intelligence, as myths and fears once imagined? The speculation is unsettling, not only for its scientific implications, but for its echoes of darker histories. The colonial centuries were already marred by the classification of peoples into hierarchies, by the misuse of evolutionary thought to justify conquest and domination. To imagine accelerating the evolution of apes towards some human likeness risks repeating this arrogance as though humanity itself were the measure against which all life must be judged. Evolution has no hierarchy, no chosen summit. To impose one is to misunderstand its very essence. Still, at the extreme edge of science, such questions arise because the tools exist. Researchers studying brain development have already identified genes like FOXP2, linked to speech and language, and SRGAP2, which influences the growth of neurons. Differences in these genes between humans and apes offer tantalizing clues to why human cognition took its distinct path. Yet to imagine altering them deliberately in another species is to trespass into a moral terrain as tangled as any jungle. What responsibility would follow? What unforeseen consequences might unfold? The impatience of human curiosity collides here with the patience of nature. Evolution works in spans far beyond the scale of human lifetimes. It is a process of endless trial, error, and adaptation, measured in millions of years, not decades. The human desire to see immediate change, to glimpse apes becoming human within a single generation, is born of misunderstanding. It is to forget that evolution is not performance, but persistence. Apes do not need to become human because they are already successful, already evolved for their world. The Amazon rainforest itself whispers this truth. Its tribes, each with unique languages, rituals, and knowledge of the forest, embody the vast diversity that human culture alone can generate. No genetic divergence separates one tribe from another in the way apes and humans are separated. Instead, it is culture, history, and adaptation to climate that shape their worlds. In this way, diversity flourishes not by apes climbing toward humanity, but by humanity branching into endless cultural forms. As fluid and adaptive as the rivers of the forest, the extreme edge of science reminds us of both our power and our peril. With CRISPR and EvoDevo, humans hold the keys to rewriting life's script, but to wield them without humility risks collapsing again into the ancient mistake, mistaking progress for destiny and ourselves for its authors. Evolution is not a ladder to climb, but a web to belong to, and if the temptation to alter it is strong, so too must be the discipline to step back and listen to the forest, to the apes, and to the lessons written in the patient silence of deep time at the frontiers of biology. Experiments unfold that blur the boundary between natural evolution and deliberate design. In hidden laboratories, researchers have demonstrated the power of gene drives, mechanisms that can spread a chosen genetic trait through an entire X population in just a few generations. Mosquitoes, for instance, have been engineered to resist malaria or to become infertile, offering the possibility of eradicating a disease that has plagued humanity for millennia. The scale of this intervention is staggering. A species that once evolved slowly under the weight of ecosystems and climate can now be altered in a matter of years. Such work reveals not only the potential of human ingenuity, but the weight of responsibility that comes with it. If we can rewrite insects, what prevents the temptation to imagine rewriting primates? This thought is not fantasy alone. Advances in comparative genomics continuously highlight where human and ape DNA diverge. Beyond FOXP2 and sRGAP2, researchers have identified other crucial differences: regulatory genes that influence the timing of brain development, expansions in certain regions of the cerebral cortex, duplications that enhance synaptic growth. These are not monumental rewritings of the genome, but subtle retunings of the developmental symphony. Each one contributed to the rise of human cognition, yet each one also illustrates the impossibility of replicating this path artificially. To attempt it would not be to recreate humanity, but to birth something unforeseen, a being with unknown needs, unknown capacities, and unknown vulnerabilities. The Human Genome Project, completed in 2003, was hailed as the book of life laid open. 3 billion base pairs, charted and catalogued, offered a new kind of mirror. Yet the reflection was humbling rather than triumphant. Humans were found to have fewer protein-coding genes than once imagined, only around 20,000, barely more than a fruit fly. What distinguishes humanity is not a surplus of raw material, but the intricate regulation of when and where these genes are expressed. The script of life is simple in letters, but infinite in orchestration. This insight dismantles the illusion that evolution is about accumulating more genes, more complexity, more progress. Instead, it is about tuning and timing, small shifts that ripple outward into worlds of difference. In the Amazon, genetics tells another story. Studies of tribes living deep within the rainforest reveal traces of migrations stretching back tens of thousands of years. Their DNA carries echoes of ancient Siberian crossings, of Bering Land bridges, of forgotten contact with other human groups now extinct. Within their genomes lies proof of humanity's restless branching. Not apes climbing toward humans, but humans themselves diversifying into myriad forms, each adapted to the rivers, forests, and climates they called home. The genetic tapestry of the Amazon demonstrates that evolution does not pause once human is achieved. Instead, it continues, quiet and ceaseless, shaping resistance to disease, adaptation to diet, and resilience to environment. Here, the contrast is stark. Apes, shaped by millions of years in the canopy, have remained close to their ecological niche. Humans, restless and cultural, have spread into deserts, tundras, and megdacities, transforming not their genes but their worlds. Culture evolves faster than biology, rewriting the rules of survival in real time. Fire, agriculture, medicine, each is a cultural gene, passed down not through chromosomes, but through stories, rituals, and memory. To mistake this cultural branching for apes turning into humans is to confuse the speeds of two different evolutions. Biological change is slow, glacial, patient. Cultural change is torrential, a flood reshaping landscapes in generations, and yet, even culture cannot escape biology's frame. The temptation of CRISPR is that it bridges the two, allowing culture to reach into the genome itself, to alter the very substrate upon which evolution works. It is here, on this knife's edge, that philosophy intrudes with urgent questions. Should we edit ourselves to resist disease? Should we enhance intelligence, memory, or strength? And if we do so, will we remain human, or will we begin a new branch, one that may one day look upon us as we now look upon apes? The ethics of altering another species are even more fraught. To accelerate the evolution of apes toward human likeness would be an act not of science, but of hubris, echoing the colonial impulse to reshape the world in our own image. It assumes that humanity is the goal of all life, when in truth, we are one among many. Such thinking repeats the very error this story began with, the belief in a ladder, a pinnacle, a chosen summit. Meanwhile, the apes of the Amazon and Africa live out a different lesson. They thrive because they are what they are, not because they are becoming something else. Their survival is proof that evolution rewards fitness to the environment, not movement toward an imagined end. The forest does not demand skyscrapers or languages to measure worth. It demands balance with cycles of fruiting, with rivers that flood, with predators that stalk. By this measure, apes are as evolved as humans, perhaps more attuned to the living systems upon which all depend, at the extreme edge of science. The tools of evo-devo and gene editing tempt us with visions of rewriting destiny. But beneath that temptation lies a deeper revelation. The story of evolution is not about reaching humanity, nor about transcending it. It is about the endless branching of life, each path valid, each form complete in its own survival. The Amazon tribes remind us that diversity already flourishes without altering genomes, shaped by language, myth, and memory. The apes remind us that survival does not require transformation into us, and science itself reminds us that even with the keys to rewrite the code, the true mystery is not how to change life, but how to understand its patience. Evolution's theater stretches across billions of years. Human impatience measures in decades. Between the two lies a silence as deep as the forest at night, filled with unseen movements, whispered adaptations, and futures that cannot be rushed. To stand at the edge of this silence is to glimpse the true scale of our ignorance, and to feel, perhaps, the first stirrings of humility 6 to 7 million years ago. In the shifting landscapes of Africa, a quiet divide took place. A single population of primates, neither ape nor human, began to split along separate paths. One lineage remained bound to the canopy and the forest, its survival secured by strength, agility, and the wisdom of social bonds. The other, through subtle changes in anatomy and behavior, embarked on a trajectory that would lead to tools, language, and civilization. This was not a predetermined story, not a ladder climbing toward inevitability, but a branching, a divergence shaped by chance, climate, and necessity. The fossil record offers glimpses of this threshold. Sahelanthropus chadensis, discovered in Chad, bears a skull that hints at upright posture, a forward-placed foramen magnum suggesting the first experiments with bipedalism. Later, Australopithecus ferensis, immortalized in the skeleton of Lucy, walked the savannas on 2 legs, hands freed for gestures, for carrying food, for striking stones together. These early steps were not superior, only different. Where apes retained the architecture of climbing, these hominins traded branches for open ground, their survival tied to a changing climate that demanded movement across expanding grasslands. Natural selection, patient and blind, carved adaptations from necessity. Bipedalism conferred endurance in the heat, allowing hominins to travel long distances, to follow herds, to scavenge or hunt. Enlarging brains, though costly in energy, enabled new forms of problem-solving, cooperation, and eventually the crafting of tools. Yet each adaptation came with risks. Walking upright exposed vital organs. Bigger brains demanded longer childhoods, and stone tools drew predators as often as they provided food. Evolution is never a march forward. It is a negotiation between trade-offs, each survival purchased with new vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, apes followed no lesser path. Chimpanzees refined intricate social hierarchies, alliances, and even primitive tool use of their own, stripping branches to fish termites, cracking nuts with stones. Gorillas harnessed immense strength to dominate their ecological niche, sustaining themselves on leaves and stems that required no fire, no metal, no cities. Orangutans, solitary among the great apes, perfected the art of forest survival, their intelligence channeled into memory of fruiting cycles and the patient construction of arboreal nests. Each lineage demonstrates that evolution is not a competition with a single victor, but a branching bush, each twig equally valid in its success. Population genetics reveals why not every species transforms into something else. Mutations arise at random, some offering advantage, most neutral or harmful. A population in balance with its environment may remain stable for millions of years, adapting in place rather than shifting into a new form. Crocodiles, horseshoe crabs, and ginkgo trees embody this truth, their resilience a testament to evolutionary stasis. Apes, too, in their forests, embody a living equilibrium. To ask why they have not become human is to misunderstand the process itself. They have already become what their world requires. The Amazon rainforest stands as a living laboratory of this principle. Within its dense canopy, more species exist than anywhere else on Earth. Jaguars, anacondas, poison frogs, orchids, each finely tuned to its microhabitat. None are behind or ahead. Each is simply adapted. A tree frog's suctioned toes are as exquisite a solution as the human hand. a jaguar's jaws as refined as the human brain. In such abundance, the illusion of progression collapses. Evolution is revealed as divergence, as coexistence, as countless strategies flourishing in parallel. For humanity, the mystery lies not in superiority, but in contingency. Had the Rift Valley's climate not shifted, had forests remained unbroken, perhaps bipedalism would never have taken hold. Perhaps the lineage that led to humans would have faded, while another branch rose in its place. The fossil record is littered with cousins: Paranthropus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, species that thrived for hundreds of thousands of years before vanishing. Evolution favors none permanently. It writes stories in eras, then erases them, leaving only fragments for future minds to unearth. To reflect on the divergence of humans and apes is to step outside the illusion of destiny. The great apes are not incomplete versions of us. They are their own victories, as ancient and as rightful as humanity itself. The branching bush of life does not reach upward toward a crown. It expands outward, endlessly, into forms as diverse as the rainforest. And within this branching, humanity is not the goal, but one fragile possibility among countless others. The story of divergence between humans and apes does not unfold in a single moment, nor can it be confined to a single discovery. It is a saga written across epochs, stitched together by fossils, fragments of DNA, and the slow, relentless shaping of environments that left their mark on bodies and minds alike. Each layer of earth, each gene sequenced, is a page in a sprawling chronicle of adaptation without direction, survival without intent. As the African climate shifted between wet forests and dry savannas over millions of years, evolutionary pressures unfolded like tides. Populations of early primates, once united in their forest world, were fractured by geography and by the habitats that rose in their place. Some remained within the safety of trees, where strength and agility ensured survival. Others ventured onto open ground, where the ability to walk upright and cover distances became essential. Neither choice was superior. Both were solutions to different problems, crafted not by foresight but by necessity. The fossil record captures this mosaic of possibilities. Australopithecus afarensis thrived nearly 3 million years ago, straddling two worlds, a creature capable of upright walking, but still skilled in climbing, a transitional being embodying the ambiguity of adaptation. Its survival strategy was not linear progress toward humanity, but flexibility. Later, Homo erectus emerged, bearing fire, tools, and endurance for migration. This species endured for nearly 2 million years, far longer than modern humans have yet existed, spreading across Africa and into Asia, leaving evidence of camps and stone hand axes that testify to intelligence, though not identical to ours. Their story demonstrates that even within the genus Homo, multiple paths blossomed and withered, proving that no species, not even ours, can claim to be the final outcome. Modern genetics confirms this branching model with precision. By comparing genomes, scientists have measured that humans and chimpanzees share approximately 98.8% of their DNA. This small margin, less than 2%, carries within it the instructions for differences in brain growth, immune response, and the development of vocal tracts. Yet, to imagine this similarity as a ladder, apes one step below humanity, is misleading. The divergence represents not one rising above the other, but two lineages drifting apart, each adapting to their environments in ways that worked. Chimpanzees do not possess smaller versions of human genes waiting to unfold. They carry genes fully tailored to their own ecological reality. Population genetics explains further why not every lineage is pressured toward drastic change. Many species, including apes, have reached adaptive plateaus where stability offers the greatest chance of survival. Mutations accumulate, but natural selection filters them against the environment. In a rainforest where fruit cycles are predictable, strength and cooperation within social groups ensure survival far more reliably than language or symbolic thought. For apes, the cost of developing large human-like brains, long childhoods, high energy demands would not yield sufficient advantage to outweigh the risks. Evolution, in this way, conserves balance rather than driving toward complexity for its own sake. The Amazon rainforest illustrates this principle on a grand scale. Its staggering biodiversity is not evidence of progression, but of divergence multiplied endlessly. A single hectare can contain hundreds of tree species, each competing for light, water, and soil in slightly different ways. Birds evolve plumage that mirrors fruits or flowers. Insects mimic bark and leaves. Mammals adapt to niches as hunters, seed dispersers, or climbers. None follow a path toward a single, advanced form. They spread outward into countless variations, each precise to its context. In this living web, humanity is only one thread among millions. Not the goal, but a participant. Philosophically, the misconception persists because of humanity's bias toward seeing itself as an apex. For centuries, illustrations of evolution have depicted a ladder from crouching ape to upright man, from darkness to enlightenment. Yet modern evolutionary biology dismantles this image. Life is not a ladder, but a tree, branching unpredictably, with no species placed above another. Dinosaurs once reigned with unmatched dominance, only to vanish in a geological heartbeat, while mammals, once small, nocturnal survivors, inherited the earth by accident of extinction. The apes of today are no less successful than we are, their survival evidence of strategies perfected for their world. The haunting realization is that evolution holds no favorites. If conditions change beyond what humans can adapt to, climate collapse, resource depletion, or new diseases, humanity, too, could vanish. The fossilized remains of Neanderthals and Denisovans remind us that intelligence alone is no guarantee of permanence. We are not immune to the same forces that shaped and erased countless species before us. Evolution's indifference is absolute, yet within this indifference lies a quiet revelation. To understand that apes remain apes, not because they failed to become human, but because they succeeded in remaining themselves, reshapes how one views the story of life. It suggests that progress is an illusion born of perspective, a projection of human culture onto natural history. The truth is subtler, humbler, and far more profound. The world is not a tale of unfinished creatures waiting to arrive at humanity, but a symphony of adaptations, each complete in its own right. Thus, the central theory that humans and apes diverged from a common ancestor millions of years ago is not merely a scientific claim. It is a reframing of existence. It reminds us that our uniqueness is not a crown, but a branch, fragile, temporary, and dependent on the stability of environments that sustain us. In the dense forests of Africa and the endless sprawl of the Amazon, the branching continues, silent and ceaseless, with or without us, in the quiet corridors of science. There are places where data and imagination meet, where firm evidence dissolves into mystery, and speculation becomes a bridge across the unknown. Chapter 9 belongs to this realm, where the boundaries of accepted theory give way to questions that linger just beyond certainty. Among the most compelling frameworks lies the concept of punctuated equilibrium. Unlike the image of evolution as a smooth, gradual slope, this theory envisions it as a landscape of silence and eruption. For vast stretches of time, species remain stable, locked in equilibrium with their environments. Then, when climate or catastrophe intrudes, change comes in a sudden cascade, as if nature itself had leaped forward. In the fossil record, this rhythm can be seen in the abrupt appearances of new forms. As with the rapid spread of Homo erectus after the climatic oscillations of Africa 2 million years ago, evolution, it seems, often walks in fits and starts. Not a gentle drift, but a series of jolts, triggered by upheaval. The climate played its hand as both sculptor and destroyer. Around 2.5 million years ago, Earth entered a cycle of ice ages that shattered stability. Forests retreated, savannas spread, and rainfall patterns shifted like restless tides. For early hominins, survival demanded not only physical change, but behavioral transformation. The bipedal gait, once a tentative adaptation, became essential for covering wide distances in open landscapes. Tool use, once incidental, turned into necessity. Fire, once an accident of lightning, became an ally. Each climatic pulse tightened the pressures, shaping brains and behaviors in ways no static environment could have. Demanded. Here arises one of the most tantalizing mysteries. Why humans, among all primates, developed the rare gift of language and abstract thought. Comparative studies reveal that apes possess the foundations of communication, gestures, calls, even the ability to learn symbolic systems in captivity. Yet only humans bound these sparks into full syntax, into stories, into culture that transcends generations. Some theorists suggest that language emerged as a survival tool in unstable climates, where cooperation required more than instinct. Others propose a co-evolutionary spiral, in which social complexity and linguistic ability reinforced each other, creating a feedback loop that accelerated intelligence. Still others argue that language was not inevitable, but a fragile accident, one of countless evolutionary experiments, which, in other times, might never have ignited. Beyond the mainstream lie more speculative ideas, where science shades into philosophy and wonder. Some researchers have entertained the possibility of directed panspermia, the notion that life's code, or its evolutionary trajectory, might have been seeded from elsewhere, intentionally or not, by forces beyond Earth. While evidence for such claims remains elusive, the genetic universality of life, written in DNA shared across bacteria and humans alike, tempts reflection. If evolution has unfolded under cosmic conditions, is humanity an anomaly, or part of a broader pattern written into the universe itself? Are intelligence and consciousness accidents of terrestrial chance, or are they destinies embedded in the laws of physics and chemistry, waiting to bloom wherever conditions allow? These questions stir an ancient unease. Is humanity the inevitable outcome of evolution, or a fluke, fragile and temporary? The fossil record hints at contingency more than destiny. Neanderthals, with brains as large as ours, mastered tools, fire, and art. Shadowy cousins, revealed only through genetic traces, thrived across Asia. Each had the potential, under slightly different conditions, to inherit the Earth. The disappearance of these lineages, whether through competition, climate, or interbreeding, was not predestined. Had history tilted by the smallest margin, another species might be telling its story now, or none at all. The counterfactual lingers with haunting clarity. If Neanderthals had survived, would the world hold to intelligent species in uneasy coexistence, sharing ideas or clashing over resources? If Homo floresiensis, the tiny hobbit of Indonesia, had endured, how would human identity have reshaped itself in the presence of a parallel civilization? These shadows remind us that our dominance is neither eternal nor guaranteed. We walk a narrow ridge, built not upon certainty, but upon accidents of survival. Thus, the speculative edges of science are not idle curiosities. They are mirrors, reflecting how little is truly known about why intelligence arose, why apes did not tread the same path, and why one branch of the tree, our own, came to see itself as exceptional. Whether by chance, climate, or cosmic law, humanity's story is but one among countless possibilities, chosen not by destiny, but by the blind indifference of evolution. And that indifference carries its own profound lesson. The tree could have grown otherwise. The speculative edges of evolutionary thought stretch further still, into realms where imagination and data intertwine. Here, science does not always claim certainty, but instead dares to sketch possibilities at the margins of knowledge, probing the question of why one primate became human while others remained, in their own enduring forms. Among the more controversial ideas lies the so-called aquatic ape hypothesis, proposed in the mid-20th century. It suggested that early human ancestors might have adapted to semi-aquatic environments, explaining traits like reduced body hair, bipedalism, and voluntary breath control. While mainstream paleoanthropology regards this hypothesis with skepticism, dismissing much of it as weakly supported, its endurance in cultural imagination reflects something deeper: humanity's restless search for an origin story that feels distinct, even extraordinary. For many, the hypothesis whispers that perhaps human divergence was not simply a matter of climate or savanna, but of a unique ecological niche, one that left subtle imprints on the body. Whether flawed or not, it reveals the desire to find in our past a spark of singularity. Other speculative frameworks look not to oceans, but to Earth itself, as a living whole. The Gaia hypothesis, introduced by James Lovelock in the 1970s, argued that Earth functions like a self-regulating organism, its biosphere maintaining conditions for life through feedback loops of climate, atmosphere, and biology. In this vision, evolution unfolds not only within isolated species, but as part of a planetary system striving toward balance. Though refined into the modern study of Earth's system science, Gaia's poetic resonance remains. If the planet itself breathes and regulates, then humanity's rise is not the story of dominance, but a byproduct of a larger organism's restless equilibrium. From this lens, apes and humans alike are threads in Earth's tapestry, each woven by forces far greater than themselves. More radical still are the philosophical musings that place consciousness at the heart of evolution. Some thinkers have suggested that human awareness, self-reflection, abstract thought, the ability to imagine futures, might not merely be an accident of neural complexity, but a deeper feature of reality. Quantum theories of consciousness, though controversial and largely speculative, propose that awareness might emerge from quantum processes in the brain, linking biology to the strange foundations of physics. If such ideas hold even a fragment of truth, they imply that consciousness may not be a biological anomaly, but a phenomenon the universe is predisposed to generate. Under this light, human intelligence becomes not a random branch of primate evolution, but one expression of a hidden cosmic tendency. Yet the chilling possibility remains. Perhaps intelligence is not inevitable, but rare, fragile, and fleeting. Studies of evolutionary history revealed that for billions of years, life thrived without consciousness as humans know it. dinosaurs ruled for over 160 million years, shaping ecosystems with power and diversity, yet they left no written language, no mathematics, no telescopes to peer into the stars. For most of Earth's story, survival required no abstract thought. If so, then the rise of humans was not the unfolding of destiny, but the roll of evolutionary dice. Had a single asteroid veered slightly off course, had a single climate shift unfolded differently, primates might never have risen beyond the canopy of the forest. This realization provokes haunting. Imagine an Earth where Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, became dominant. Their robust builds and colder climate adaptations might have led to societies structured differently, perhaps less expansive, perhaps more sustainable. Or envision a timeline where Homo erectus, with its endurance and fire mastery, carried forward its line without giving rise to us. In each shadowed scenario, evolution still produces intelligence, but intelligence shaped by different pressures, different choices, different fates. It is a reminder that evolution writes no guarantees. It scribbles possibilities, many of which vanish before they can be read. Speculation also reaches outward, beyond Earth itself. Astrobiologists ask whether the forces that shaped humanity are universal or singular. If climate instability and environmental challenge were catalysts for intelligence here, might they be elsewhere as well? Worlds orbiting unstable stars, moons with shifting oceans, planets racked by volcanic upheaval. Could these serve as crucibles for other minds? Minds that, like us, emerged from the need to adapt swiftly to chaos? Or are we alone, our consciousness the improbable bloom of a fragile branch that might never appear again? The answers, for now, remain hidden. But what lingers is the reminder that apes did not fail to become human, just as tribes did not remain trapped in some imagined past. Each species, each culture, is a solution written by its environment, refined through countless trials. Evolution did not stop for apes, nor did it crown humans. It branched, diverged, and wandered. The stories of punctuated equilibrium, aquatic speculation, Gaia's breath, and even cosmic consciousness all point to a humbling truth. Humanity is not the measure of life's progress, but one variation among infinite potential forms. And yet, in the quiet hours of reflection, another question arises. If intelligence is so precarious, if it is neither promised nor permanent, then what responsibility falls upon the one species who holds it now? For perhaps the true mystery is not why apes did not become us, but whether we will endure long enough to remain ourselves in the laboratories and rainforests of today. The story continues, not as myth, but as science unfolding in real time. The question that haunted naturalists of the past, why apes do not become human, why tribes do not mirror earlier stages of humanity, is now being pursued with instruments far more precise than quills and sketches. The double helix, once hidden in the quiet machinery of the cell, has been unraveled, mapped, and compared across species, revealing with staggering clarity the kinship of all primates. Geneticists now weave immense atlases of life, sequencing the genomes of chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and humans. Within these maps lies a revelation both simple and profound. We share not only bloodlines, but nearly the same molecular script. 99% of DNA aligns between ape and human. Yet within that sliver of divergence resides the architecture of language, the flair of abstract thought, the restless curiosity that builds cities and satellites. Scientists search for these subtle differences, like archaeologists brushing dust from ancient inscriptions, hoping to glimpse the exact mutations that tipped the balance toward us. Among them are genes tied to brain growth, vocal tract control, and neural plasticity, tiny switches that, when flipped, wrote a new kind of story in flesh. But these efforts are not limited to molecular archives. In the green labyrinth of the Amazon, conservation biologists struggled to preserve what remains of the world's great primates and the indigenous societies who share their forests. Deforestation, climate change, and encroachment threaten to erase not only species, but entire worldviews. To protect a tribe or an ape community is not simply to save a life form. It is to preserve a library of adaptation, a record of how beings have learned to survive in a living cathedral older than civilization itself. Anthropologists, too, labor to correct centuries of misinterpretation. The Amazonian tribes, once labeled as living fossils, are now recognized as cultures as modern as any. Their tools, languages, and cosmologies uniquely suited to their environment. Their knowledge of medicinal plants, ecological cycles, and spiritual kinship with the forest offers insights science still struggles to quantify. The lesson is as vital as it is humbling. Human diversity is not a ladder climbing from primitive to advanced, but a spectrum of adaptations shaped by history, geography, and imagination in parallel. Cognitive science peels back the veil on ape intelligence. Observations in both captivity and the wild reveal a striking depth of mind. Chimpanzees fashion tools from twigs to fish termites from their mounds. Bonobos settle conflicts with gestures of peace rather than violence. Orangutans memorize vast maps of fruiting trees across their territories. Some experiments show apes recognizing themselves in mirrors. Others hint at rudimentary elements of language through symbols and signs. These discoveries dismantle the notion of a sharp boundary between us and them. Instead, they reveal a continuum, a shared inheritance of cognition. Yet, even here, the differences remain profound. No ape, however clever, builds symbolic systems as vast as mathematics or crafts myths to explain the stars. The gulf is not of value, but of trajectory. Astrobiology enters this dialogue, turning its gaze outward. If evolution shaped humans from the same genetic clay as apes, what paths might unfold on distant worlds? The branching tree of life on Earth becomes a guide, suggesting that intelligence may arise not as an inevitable summit, but as one of many possible outcomes. A planet dense with forests might give rise to creatures whose minds echo primates, bound in cooperation and memory. A world of oceans might favor intelligence shaped by sonar and fluid navigation, unlike anything terrestrial. By studying apes alongside humans, scientists do not merely map our past, they sketch possible futures scattered across the cosmos. And so the intersection of biology and philosophy comes into sharper view. To be evolved is not to be human. Evolution has no summit, no ordained pinnacle. Each species, whether ape in the canopy or tribe on the riverbank, is precisely as evolved as the other, each molded by pressures unseen, each carrying the full weight of survival's artistry. The lesson, now clearer than ever, is that life is not a march toward a final form, but a branching, endless improvisation. The current efforts of science, the sequencing of genomes, the safeguarding of cultures, the decoding of minds, are not answers in themselves, but acts of remembrance and preparation. They remind us that our kinship with apes is not an unfinished story, but an ongoing one. They remind us that tribes in the Amazon are not relics of the past, but voices of the present. And they remind us that evolution's mystery is not why others did not become us, but how we became ourselves and what, in the face of an indifferent universe, we choose to become next. Beneath the canopy of modern science, the story deepens. The pursuit of knowledge is no longer confined to dusty fossils or speculative theories. It is a living enterprise, unfolding with every gene sequenced, every primate observed, every forest protected. What emerges is a portrait of life as both fragile and resilient. A reminder that the question of human uniqueness cannot be disentangled from the broader web of beings that share our ancestry. In the sterile glow of genome laboratories, machines hum as they read the ancient code of life, letter by molecular letter. Projects such as the Great Ape Genome Project have revealed astonishing truths. The divergence between humans and chimpanzees is not marked by sweeping wholesale rewrites, but by subtle rearrangements. A single gene affecting jaw muscle strength may have liberated space for brain growth. Regulatory switches, not just structural genes, seem to have guided the flowering of symbolic thought. Modern research points to the FOXP2 gene, long associated with language, as one of the delicate pivots upon which the human story turned. By comparing indigenous human populations with primates, researchers uncover echoes of migration, adaptation, and resilience written in the genome script, stories of survival amid ice ages, droughts, and pandemics stretching back tens of thousands of years. Yet these revelations bring urgency, for the great apes themselves teeter on the edge of disappearance. Gorillas in Central Africa face poaching and habitat loss, their populations dwindling even as their DNA illuminates our own origins. Orangutans of Borneo and Sumatra lose forests daily to palm oil expansion, each felled tree severing threads of evolutionary memory. Chimpanzees and bonobos, once ranging freely across equatorial Africa, now find themselves hemmed in by human settlements and war. Conservation efforts, sanctuaries, anti-poaching patrols. International treaties are not merely acts of compassion, but of preservation. To lose these species would be to silence branches of the evolutionary tree still vibrant with possibility. Each primate is not just an echo of what we once were, but a mirror of what remains possible for life on Earth. The Amazon rainforest becomes a stage where these themes converge. Within its tangled ecosystems live not only primates like howler monkeys, capuchins, and wakaris, but also human societies who have adapted to its rhythms for millennia. For anthropologists, the Amazon is not a window into humanity's past, but a testament to its diversity. Tribes, such as the Yanomami, the Kayapo, and the Motsas, live lives interwoven with the river, the canopy, and the spirits of the forest. Far from being frozen relics of some prehistoric time, they are innovators of survival. Their technologies shaped not in steel, but in wood, fiber, and song. Their existence challenges the outdated notion of a linear progression of civilizations, instead presenting a mosaic of equally modern, equally valid ways of being human. Protecting these societies means protecting perspectives that redefine the very word progress.